When World War II ended in 1945, the USA had to address a very specific gender change that had happened during the war. While the men were at war, women had gone out to work for the very first time, and they liked their jobs. They liked having financial freedom, the ability to make choices. They had friends outside of the home. They didn't want to go back to just being stay-at-home wives who really didn't have any job options once they were married. So the United States launched a massive propaganda campaign that became known as we know it today as the 1950s housewife. Huge billboards and ads of beautiful women, perfectly done up, hair rolled, long skirts, happy and joyous to be cleaning their home and so excited for a new vacuum cleaner. We see a lot of that around us today. The trad wife movement is in full bloom. You can walk into Anthropologie or Target and see these long Little House on the Prairie dresses and this convincing image online that you'll be so happy here. You'll be so happy if you just come home and cook and clean and be a stay-at-home wife. But what those propaganda campaigns don't tell you is that in the 1950s, for women, suicide was incredibly high. So was domestic violence. Amphetamines, barbiturates, and benzodiazepines were so commonly prescribed to help women cope with their day that they were advertised in magazines as mommy's little helpers. And traditional evangelicalism has really pushed this idea of the traditional wife to the harm of others. And today on the podcast, I have writer of The Well-Trained Wife, Tia Levings, to come share her story escaping Christian patriarchy on today's episode of Flipping Tables. Hello and welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for the recent ratings and reviews on the show. It is incredibly helpful, and it keeps me not only in a podcast playlist, but also helps me find sponsors for the show to bring you even bigger names to interview, as well as to be able to do some podcasts on location and specific Q&As. I'm really excited for today's episode. I read Tia Levings' book in one day. And it was so true to how I was raised in the church, and a big part of the reason that I don't participate in organized religion at all anymore. And she is just an inspirational beacon of light, not just for leaving Christian patriarchy and Christianity, but also healing, just healing from trauma, becoming yourself, learning yourself, even if you didn't have the tools to do that when you were younger. A truly inspiring conversation today with Tia Levings, and I'm so excited you're here to join the both of us. Tia, welcome to Flipping Tables. Thank you so much for being here with me today. In the intro, I already talked about the fact that I read your book, The Well-Trained Wife, in one day. I couldn't stop reading it. All of work could stop. I cried with you and for you, being raised in this world and now being someone who has completely walked away from it, but see friends and my families and my sisters really still trapped in it. I'm just so deeply appreciative that you took the time to be here.
Oh, thank you. And big kudos. That's a lot to take in one day. So your blessed little nervous system, I just want to give you a hug.
I just sit in the room and kind of meditate a little bit before I could go to sleep.
Yes.
So, and for the people who haven't read your book, I'm going to really kind of talk about your life. Tell me about your introduction to faith, like anywhere from your childhood to your early teen years.
Yeah, so it's really basic and normal and so mainstream. My first 10 years of childhood were spent in a rural community in Upper Michigan, and we went to church as part of our lives, but really kind of it was spotty. Religion was like this thing that I knew was like part of an adult life, and it was something we did occasionally, Christmas and Easter definitely. But my parents were very hardworking people, and if we needed to get work done on Sunday, it was no big deal for us to stay home and work on the weekend or relax on the weekend. You know, one of my favorite memories growing up with my dad is going to Sunday breakfast.
Yeah.
And he'd always get eggs Benedict, and I would have my toast and bacon. And sometimes we wouldn't quite make it to church. My mom would be there, because she loved music and the choir. And so I remember lots of typical 80s type stuff, the felt boards, the Bible stories.
Oh, the felt boards.
All like that normal stuff.
We had those in the 90s too.
I call it my trauma light because I do have some very scary hell trauma from my early childhood around 4 and 5. And I prayed my little prayer when I was 4.5. And, that big weighty decision they put on little children's shoulders to decide their fate for the rest of their lives. I have that. And then it really just stayed that way until we moved to Florida when I was 10 and we joined a mega church. It was one of the largest churches in the Southeast at the time. Well, the whole country. We had 20,000
Wow.
on roll, and this First Baptist Jacksonville, very, very large church. And then within a few short years, I was going 6 days a week, and I was in the trenches of, again, mainstream evangelical culture in the late 80s and early 90s. So, like, this is contemporary Christian music and True Love Waits and Abstinence and Rapture and an America within an America, because the evangelical church was becoming more nationalist and more politicized
Yep.
and more fundamentalist as I grew up. So that's kind of like my first 20 years.
And so what changed with your parents going from, because if you're going from, I'm going twice a year to basically every day, what was
Yeah.
the shift for them?
Some of it was just that my sister and I were in puberty and they were very scared that we would go wrong. Like it's just scary to be a young parent.
Yeah.
There's a lot of social standing and belonging, and it seemed like such a safe place to bring your kids. So this church was very wealthy, very white, very happy. And so it was like a great safe place to have your kids involved. And they would not make dangerous friendships. They would not get engaged in dangerous behaviors. And you could trust everything that they were surrounded with was positive and good and healthy. And they didn't have really any evidence to the contrary.
Yeah.
I think this is really important in those churches, that when there is evidence to the contrary, it's shuttled away.
Yes.
So when
Quickly.
you couple that with, yeah, exactly, when you have a major marketing arm, with this wealthy church, we had 11 city blocks downtown. Like everybody in town went
Jesus,
there. It was like,
huge.
there's no escaping it. And
Yeah.
when I went to public school, I was surrounded by 50 to 75 kids who went to my church. So I didn't even need to interact with people who weren't from that same footprint, which was just, I think, really reassuring to my parents, who were very busy and hardworking. And this is the 80s, so everybody's a little feral and they're trusting their environment.
Yeah.
There's so many factors that went into it,
Yeah.
but they really promoted a wholesome environment, and my parents trusted I was in a wholesome environment. And I myself would have said, this is great and happy. Like, I'm having a great time with my friends, and we're teaching everyone about Jesus, and we're the most right. And if you do it our way, you will be the most happy. That all seemed very plausible.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point that I haven't really talked about on the show, because I've fully deconstructed and walked away from organized religion entirely. And putting on children that you have to decide where you're going to spend eternity when you're 4 or 5 years old. I was 5 years old. A child, one, is not supposed to handle pressure like that. And two, doesn't have the mental acuity to understand what it is you're telling them.
That's key, because indoctrination interferes with child development. There are other things 5-year-olds are supposed to be doing that we were not doing, because we were learning first-time obedience and indoctrination. And so before we even know who we are already deciding what we're going to be for the rest of our lives. We're already aligning with a faith group and a theology. And we are, instead of learning to become assertive and explore ourselves and know ourselves, we are falling into line with what they're telling us to be.
Yep.
So they don't have a goal of producing an autonomous adult with agency. That is not what they want. But it is what child development leads to. If you successfully develop a child, you will have a fully actualized adult who can take care of herself. And that is not what religion wants.
Well, it's telling you what to think, not how to think.
Exactly.
And hence the Bible in schools and the 10 Commandments, because you got to get them young. You got to lock them in young so that they'll stay committed to it their whole life.
Yep.
And when you kind of hit your teen years, was there ever a moment, now you're going to church more frequently, where things took a turn or things kind of felt unsettling? Did you ever have any doubt at that time about what you were participating in your like teens to late teens?
So when I was 12 and 13, I was gangly and awkward and lizard-like. I was not a cute kid. And I was not socially accepted in this wealthy white church who, all of them had gone to church with each other since they were in the nursery.
Yeah.
And so I'm this outsider, and I'm this awkward redheaded kid with weird teeth and freckles. And so I did not like going to church the first few years. I hated being drugged down there. I hated having to put a dress on. I was an outdoorsy kid, and I would have rather just, I was angry about the move. There's a lot of like family stuff happening there because they didn't prepare us for that move. It was culture shock. The South. I'm fair complected, so I hated everything about where we were. And I went through kind of a rebellious stage that actually felt good in my body. I was reading wild books. I was going to the library a lot. I made a dangerous friend at a private school.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, and we were like little rebels, and we were reading about rebels, and like a hot day with us was going to the library and then to the mall to bum quarters off old men and do just like that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But then we got into a little sexual trouble, and I ended up sexually assaulted in a way that I didn't even fully understand until I wrote the book years later. So, but it was formative because it scared me,
Yeah.
and it scared me to Jesus, basically. And
Okay.
so once I got in that box, I was really in that box. From 14 on, I believed that I would be in jeopardy if I stepped a foot out of line. I was people pleasing and fawning and in a trauma response at that point. I very much wanted what they wanted for me. So that was pretty convenient. Like if you
Yeah.
happen to want to be a Christian wife and mother, then there's no rub there, like
Yeah.
they're all too happy to mold you there.
They're
And
like, perfect. That's great.
yeah, you're not even resisting. This is great.
Yeah. So what is your memories like? What did purity culture teach you about yourself when you were learning it? What did it teach you
Well,
about a woman? What was your impression? What was your belief around what a woman is at that time?
I had a combination of societal pressure plus overt instruction.
Okay.
So we had etiquette classes, we had ladylike classes, we had older teachers teaching us that we needed to keep our voices very high pitched and sweet all the time. We had to keep sweet. We had to be very modest. If you met me, this is Jacksonville, Florida in the summer, I would have a turtleneck on underneath a long sleeve prairie dress.
Oh,
And I passed out. Like we went to New York on a choir tour, and I passed out like multiple times on that trip because of my hyper modest clothing in the middle of the summer. But I was romanticizing Anne of Green Gables, and everything related to that. They told us our ankles would be sexy if
yep.
that's
I
all
remember
we
the ankle
showed.
talk. Yep.
And this is parallel 90s fashion. So like the long straight khaki shirts, skirts, and denim skirts and things like that were in fashion. It's like the similar thing happening now with the revitalization of like 90s fashion
Well, and
and the trad stuff.
the prairie
No, I'm
dresses
like,
are
I
coming
go into
back.
Target and I'm like, what the fuck is this? This
I,
is like,
and you can see me like, and this is on video, like I've got this huge costume
Mhm.
jewelry, fishnets. I walked in and I saw these trad dresses and I'm like, you could not pay me enough. There is
Yeah.
no circumstance where
Let's
I
put
would
you in some pink flowers to your feet.
It's
I
like,
mean, yeah,
if you want to wear that, obviously great, but like it feels in the current environment that we're in so propaganda like.
it is.
It
And
feels
it
real
is.
pushy. And I'm like, I remember this in the 90s because
Hmm.
like that was when I was kind of coming up 90s, early 2000s. It was still that purity culture, abstinence, modesty. A man's going to
Yep.
get turned on by your shoulders. And I'm like, well, why doesn't he turn his head?
Right.
Like, why don't you
Like
just look in a
the
different
Bible
direction?
says he should gouge his eyes
Yeah, just
out.
gouge it
So
out. Take care of that.
yeah, quit looking at me. It's not my fault. Yeah, that's what I did. I internalized the shame. I internalized that it was my job always to fix his problem, to relieve him of his temptation. We weren't taught anything about sex at all. We knew
Of
that we
course
would
not.
learn that like right up to our wedding. We would kind of get some information, but we knew, that's like the it's like a holistic attitude of pleasing, that it's your job to please and be pleasing in all ways at all times.
Yeah.
So I expected a certain level of submission and subservience that was also preached from the pulpit. So yeah, I thought that if I was sweet enough and modest enough and pure enough, like all eyes were like getting to the wedding day virgin. That was
Right.
like that was the
Right.
thing.
That's the big victory of your whole life.
That's it right there. You've like leveled up if you've achieved it. That was the whole focus. And so I knew that if I could just follow the rules well enough, everything would be fine because that's what God blessed. God blessed
Yeah.
obedience.
And so, how did this teaching really lead to your husband?
Well, in the biggest way. So he didn't grow up there, but he grew up in a similar Southern Baptist church in a small town. My understanding was that you don't argue with men who say they've heard from God. And
Yep.
so God's best, you're always praying that you'll meet God's best in marriage. God's
Yep.
best in marriage is
And
the,
excuse me,
the
I'm going to
phrase.
correct that. I should have said
Yes.
ex-husband. I meant
Yeah, he's
husband in the
ex.
context
Right.
of your book, but it's ex-husband, just to be clear. Sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
So Alan shows up on the scene like he's this new dashing sailor. I'm pretty
Ooh.
familiar with all the guys that I had available, and they knew me, because we grew up together in the same youth group. It was a very large one, 500 kids, but
Whoa, that was your youth group?
yeah, just high school too. Like middle school was another 500 kids. Like this is our big environments. We're divided by
Huge.
side of town, like there's 45, 80 kids in my one neighborhood school, Sunday school class. So I knew that I probably wasn't going to marry any of those boys because we'd already known each other for a long time and nobody had liked me that way. And so that wasn't a thing. And at 19, a year out of high school, I was getting stale because you move up, you're called fresh meat, and you move up, and so now you have access to older guys. But again, none of them really liked me, and so in comes this group of sailors because Jacksonville's a port town,
Yep.
and they came to First Baptist basically to meet girls. And he shows up and he knows the language because he's grew up Baptist too. And he liked me. And within a month, we were engaged. He said he was God's best for my life. And all of that grooming and shaping had morphed me into somebody who did not argue with that. That was if God says that this is who you're supposed to marry, then you marry him. And you'll know that because he'll tell you. And
Yep.
if a man tells you that, then that's all you need to know.
Yep. And how
So,
reductive for women to make marriage like the peak moment of their life, even as a
yeah,
young woman.
I mean, that's interesting from my background in that my mom is like an elbows up, roll your sleeves,
Yep.
get in there. And I knew they weren't mutually exclusive, that I could have a husband and still have all these other things. But the church did not say that. They said, this is your one outcome. And they, I think, assumed that people would get together because they liked each other. So they didn't spend any time talking about chemistry or compatibility or anything like that, where you would have like a litmus test. And I think it's such a faulty assumption because that is not what we talked about so much. Like you would like each other or like something about that person, but it was also like, are they a godly man? Do they promise to pray every day? Are they going to lead your home? That doesn't really connect with chemistry, or do we have the same goals for the same ideas?
Growing up in this environment too, and mine was, again, like 90s and early 2000s, it was basically the same thing. But I remember there's no conversation about consent or what's the expectations in the home. What
Right.
kind of life do you want to have? You were never taught to ask those questions, or even that those were questions you could ask. Because in the way that my upbringing, because I was the girl who didn't want to get married and have kids. So I was the one that they were like, you need to submit your pride to God. Because I knew when I was 12, I was never having kids. I was like, I'm not doing that. That's not for me. It's too big of a calling to not be sure that you want it. And I always came
Right.
from the perspective of coming from an abusive home. I think that being a parent is the most important calling you could possibly have. So you have to make sure that it's what you want and it's what you're prepared for. But the way that my pastors would spin it for me was that like either this man is magically going to come in and tell me he's the man for me, or my dad's going to be the one who says
Right.
this is the man for you. But I didn't know anything. I didn't know about consent. I didn't know anything about sex or contraception. I didn't know how to ask questions. And after being in a couple abusive dating relationships, I read the book Why Does He Do That by Dr. Lundy Bancroft. And
You did. That's so rebellious of you.
I did, and I'm reading this book, and this was recent. This was only like 4 years ago.
Okay.
And I'm reading this book, and I'm like, why does every girl on the planet not get gifted this book? Because
Right.
if I had been able to see this and understand that this is how manipulation works, I would have seen this so much sooner before it escalated. But the church never even really talks about domestic violence.
No,
I don't remember them
and
ever talking about it.
if you learn to identify patterns of manipulation, you're going to apply it to them too. So that's why
That's
they don't pass it out.
Yeah, they're like, nope, we can't do that.
No.
So you marry Alan, and then tell me, kind of a summary through the book, your journey with Alan and your kids, and what happened and what made you finally make a change.
Yeah, so I didn't know him very well when we got married.
How long was it
and
between the time you met to when you were married?
a year.
A year.
A year. We were engaged after that first month, and there was violence in our dating engagement period, but I didn't know to call it that. And this is a big detriment to me throughout my through lines here, is that I didn't have language or understanding to interpret what was happening. So in hindsight, I can look back and say, oh, there was violent incidences. But
And can you
when I
give an
was
example of that you maybe couldn't label at the time if you feel comfortable?
Sure. I mentioned a story in passing about his roommate, and he cuffed me in the neck and left me on a beach in a storm alone and accused me of cheating on him. And I looked at that like I was in shock. Nobody had hit me like that before. but I also knew I had failed somehow, and like we'd had a fight. That's the kind of language I use. It's like
Yep.
we had a fight. I must have a redheaded temper. I must have
Yep.
done something wrong, and that's my conditioning to always examine myself for what I did wrong. He would threaten to run me off the road, threaten to decapitate me by semi truck. That happened while we were dating, and
Jesus.
I didn't know. I thought just don't get in a fight in the car, like that's like be careful in the car. So I'm like learning to tiptoe around him and take care of his moods and become very codependent, but I didn't have any vocabulary to tell somebody else, and I wouldn't have even known, like it would have been very embarrassing to tell somebody else because clearly that's my fault. It's all
Yeah.
my failure. He can't be wrong. It never dawned on me that he could be wrong until we get much further into our marriage, where I'm like, I'm doing everything I can as perfectly as I can, and it's still erratic and messed up. And then there were situations that didn't always involve me that I knew I didn't have anything to do with. But we got pregnant very quickly. My marriage, my wedding night was sexual assault 3 times. Put me into a state of shock, and I kind of stayed in a state of shock for a long period of time. Through our marriage, I was pregnant 9 times. That first pregnancy happened within the first 3 months. They were early miscarriages, and I had 5 live births and 4 surviving children. So it was pretty eventful for 11 years together that way. And my first baby was born in 96. We got married at the end of 94, so about 18 months after we were married, and if that long. My math's bad. So he didn't, he was a baby. He cried. And
Yeah.
I knew that if Alan didn't get a good night's sleep, that violence would be worse. And I was now worried that it would hurt my child. And so I turned to older, wiser women at church. This is taught. Titus 2 teaches the older women to teach the younger women to be keepers of the home and to love their husbands. And so I was like, well, who can I ask for advice? I can ask somebody who has 10 kids. I didn't know Bill Gothard or the IBLP at this point, but I knew that we had these super extra Christians, special Christians in our church that were like extra devout. They didn't use birth control. They didn't control the sides of their families. They all had, like 8+ kids. They had big vans. They dressed like Little House on the Prairie. And so they felt like a very
Bill
safe
Gothard's
place.
name like makes my blood pressure go up.
Your whole blood pressure
just
go up.
My
I know.
whole body starts to shake. I'm so angry. Anyways, go ahead.
Rightly so. Rightly so.
Such a monster.
Such a monster. And he had this, for your listeners who don't know, Bill Gothard ran something called the Institute of Basic Life Principles that had these massive events, like they were like Billy Graham crusades in stadiums, and they were multi-denominational. Anybody could come to his conference and learn the Bible, and you were going to learn to be more holy and more devout in your Christian walk. And then you would go back into your church and you would recruit IBLP families from within. So you're like cannibalizing from within. And that's what had happened at First Baptist. We had this contingency, this rise of homeschoolers in a very conservative, they were super conservative at a time where mainstream Christians weren't that conservative yet. It was pretty.
It was a lot more relaxed before
Exactly.
all that came in. Because we even had that in the church growing up. We had a couple families, and this is how I was introduced to Bill Gothard. My dad never went like whole hog into that, but we had families where it was like the women could only wear dresses. They could only wear like floor length, long sleeves, like limits around medicine and technology even.
Yeah.
And we never went all the way in there, but my dad would sometimes borrow elements. But
Sure.
I remember we went through a few lessons and I just remember being like, this is weird. Like I don't.
Yeah.
And then of course his predictably fall from grace later on. I'm just.
Right.
Too much.
Well, it's the trad movement in the beginning. Like
it is.
I was a trad wife. We called it traditional, and that's what trad's short for. So it's the same thing. Today, what we have is the critical mass. It's just hit the mainstream. But on that very smaller level, this was the trad movement being born and hitting enough mass in our mainstream church that where I knew who to go to for advice. And that was my entry point into the IBLP. I was never like a paying member, or I never attended a conference, but I was the recipient of all the teachings because they mentored me. They gave me books. They taught my husband. And we started implementing these practices without being fully aware of what we were kind of aligning with. It just seemed like we were being simple and more devout and more holy, and that if we just followed these steps and lived this way, we would have this happy outcome. So It's the same always, though they promise you a happy family,
Yep.
successful children, a good country, godly outcomes. If only you do this, this, and this. And if that doesn't happen, it's your fault. You did
Yep.
something wrong.
It's
There's something wrong with
prosperity
you.
gospel just
Right.
applied to your family.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I tapped in. Like I'm like, I want a happy family. I want to solve this violence problem in my family. And I was really good at following formulas and putting my whole back into it. So I was a great trad wife. I did everything.
It's like I checked all the boxes.
Oh, every box double.
That's one of the things. So I've never been married, and I am so thankful that I didn't get married in my late teens and early 20s, because the way my faith was at the time, that's exactly what I would have done. Like, I resonated so much when you talked about, like, I jumped all the way in and I just committed and I did more and I cooked more and I cleaned more and I did all these things. I was like, that is exactly how I would have been if I had
Mhm.
gotten married between 18 and 23.
Which is a developmental stage.
Which
There's
is
a reason why the
yeah.
missionaries and these movements go after young people. We have this like rise of male incels, the 18 to 23-year-old. They don't even have fully developed brains yet,
Yeah.
but they are the audience that movement always goes for.
Yep. And they know that they're manipulating them. They're using their
Mhm.
pain to gain from that, but also
Yep.
keep those men broken and lonely and
Yep.
lost and longing for intimacy, because they've taught the men that intimacy is sex and it's not the same thing. They've also told them that as a man, you just need a good job and to conquer women. And it's
Hmm.
just building on itself. And now we're seeing the rise in violence and
Yep.
lonely men who haven't been given the tools to be fully human. It's
Right.
it's
Or to
extreme.
exist.
Yeah,
They
it's
don't know
extremely
how to exist.
dehumanizing. Like,
In an equal environment, they have no ability to do that. And the women, to their part, like this, they are the soldiers and they are the mothers and they are the most fertile. And so movements really know how to exploit youth.
yeah, it's becoming abundantly clear in our
Hmm.
current chapter. So as you're going through this process of, you're dealing with abuse at home, now there's lots of kids, and then the blog happens. Can you tell us about that? Because
Oh,
I'm doing this show for people as if they've never read the book. I've read the book. I know exactly where things
yeah.
go. But tell us about starting the blog.
So we go back to that childhood memory. I was always a writer. I was always somebody who is very creative, highly creative. The internet had already played a pretty significant role in my life because my daughter died. My daughter Clara, which was baby number 3, she died in '99, and I was not able to go back to that ardent girl who did everything perfect. I was not able to pretend like she didn't exist, jump right in with the next baby, toe the line. I had seen too much of the world, too much of grief, was utterly cracked open, and I also felt this loyalty to be somebody Clara would have been proud of, like a mother that would
Ah,
Clara would have been proud of. And that means including her and being changed by her and not allowing this to be, covered up. And so I had found the internet shortly thereafter, and it was a group of women who were like my portal to normal. We read books, we talked about dangerous ideas. We were homeschooling mothers. We were talking about this like very safely. It wasn't like they were all rebels, but they were different kinds of Christians from different kinds of backgrounds, and we were trying to educate ourselves. And so it was this. It was called the Trapdoor Society, and it was very much a trapdoor. And so I had spent a lot of time writing on that forum and gathering my thoughts and all of that, so that when in 2004, when blogging is brand new, my brother-in-law gave me my first domain and my first WordPress
oh,
blog
I
as a
love
Christmas present.
that.
And I just wrote. Now, I was a trad wife blogger. I was towing the party line there.
But
This
even
was
then, it when I remember reading that book where when you came to that part, I'm like, oh, she's waking up.
yes,
So
I
you were
was.
still towing the line, but you were waking up, because
Hmm.
there's these moments. Every person I know that's deconstructed in any way, there's this
Hmm.
moment where they start to wake up. So tell me
Yeah,
more about it. Sorry, I'm just really
yeah. So
excited because I love
writing,
this book so much.
like apart from all of my life experiences, the way I transmute and digest information is through writing. And so I need to write in order to kind of know what I think about it. I'm also creative that way with words and word images. And I was a photographer too. I had taught myself that. And so blogging was just this very natural, organic way for me to start having an identity, having a name, sharing my ideas, exploring my ideas, questioning myself on the page. It was a humanity, a lot like a vein of humanity where I didn't have any. At the
Yeah.
time I started blogging, I was also in the highest control, most cult environment of my entire story. We were in a wife spanking cult church
Yep.
that is affiliated with Doug Wilson, and that is, if that's familiar to your ears, it's because Pete Hegseth, who's in our cabinet, belongs to the same denomination. This is very tied to current events.
Yep.
And so I was like in that world. And then at home, I was exploring, like I was feeling like a human being again for the first time in years. And so I actually get excommunicated for that because I refused to put that blog in my husband's name. The elders did not like that I was writing with my own name and having my own thoughts, even though I was writing about cloth diapers and beans and recipes and, all the tratty things. They did not want, they knew the power of words. They knew that me having an identity online under my name was not going to be ultimately submissive.
Well, and also just, especially with the extreme versions of these type of cults, as a woman having an identity at all undermines this idea that you exist solely for the pleasure and purpose of your husband, that any work you do is to support him. And
That's
even
right.
the women who, oh my goodness, they work outside the home, it's in some way to support their husband's career.
Always.
Yes.
She's a reflection. She's a reflection of him. And a lot of trad wives use that industry of their own as a justifiable line of, well, it's for the family. And as long as it's for the family, then it's okay. But it's not about her or her name or her ideas. It's supposed to stay in this narrow lane. And I think it was using maybe too many I statements or reading outside the lines a lot. Like I would do book reviews and stuff. And they knew I was reading books that weren't allowed. There's a lot of book banning in high control religion. And
well, we're seeing that publicly now too.
we are. They have always done the same things. Nothing that's happening hasn't been always the case.
Yeah. It's just, it just put on a new t-shirt and a cross necklace and said, here we are.
A really big cross. I called Caroline Levitt the vampire slayer because it's
right.
this big.
I honestly, I did wear my big cross today specifically for that reason.
No vampires will get you.
No vampires will get me. It's like, I am the vampire. What do you mean? So when was the moment that you were like, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. And when did all of it kind of break? Because you get to this point where you're like, I don't have enough shame to keep towing this line and laying myself down on the altar every day.
Yeah.
Because for me, when I lost my shame, I lost my motivation to do a lot of things that I didn't realize were purely shame motivated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I had to rebuild positive motivation for those things that were good things, like going to the gym. And but I was struggling with an eating disorder and being in the gym all the time out of shame because of this idea of, well, as a woman, it's your job to be pretty and put together all the time for your future husband. And if you don't do that, then you're not worth anything anymore. And when I lost the shame, I just couldn't hold on to that anymore the way that I did. So you start losing this as you're writing and you're kind of getting your humanness back. When did the levee break or start to break?
Yeah. So my story is different from yours in that my shame break came actually years after my escape. So my subtitle in my book is My Escape from Christian Patriarchy. And my escape was an actual physical harrowing escape by midnight after being held hostage for 4 hours. I narrowly escaped a murder-suicide with my children. But the shame that I divested from, that would come actually years later. It really came down to survival. I was breaking. I knew I had checked all the boxes. If I have a persistent character flaw that I still work on today, that's tied to that. That's not like a new revelation. It's that I have always had a tendency to romanticize and magically think and stay in situations that are really dysfunctional and dangerous too long.
Yes.
And so it's really growth for me to see the warning signs early and act on them instead of waiting until it gets to the last exit on the highway. I, in this situation, definitely waited until the very last minute. I had tried to make it perfect. I had tried to do it so well. I knew I had exhausted my ability to do that. I'd also exhausted my desire to do that because I didn't want to have a God that didn't care about me. Like, why should I care? If you don't care about me, the human being Tia, then why should I be here? You know?
Why do I care about you?
Right, because women are so interchangeable in patriarchy.
Yes.
You just need the body parts. You need the hands. You need the vagina. You need the womb. You don't need her brain, or her individuality or humanity. You don't need her as a person.
Personhood matters precisely zero in patriarchal Christianity.
So my annihilation was kind of on the line, and I still wouldn't leave. And then it wasn't until my children were threatened and I
Yeah.
realized we're going to either die here or I'm going to create the next generation of abusers and women who will stay with abusers if I stay here another minute. And I was going to leave the next day quietly and calmly. I just didn't get that far because he had a psychotic break that night, and we were in real jeopardy. So then when we left, I mean, talk about shame. I mean, it's such a
Yeah.
failure. My one job was to be a good Christian wife and mother, and I had failed at it. So I actually contended with shame for the next 10 years. It was not
And
an easy
how did you
direction.
start to heal that shame and like relinquish yourself from the guilt? Because it's
Hmm.
like you didn't fail, right? Like you were with
Right.
someone who was an abusive and mentally unwell person who
Hmm.
wasn't a good father or a good husband or a good leader or like very questionably even a Christian.
Right.
How did you deprogram that shame? How did it show up? What are some of the stories that helped you heal it?
It's really, I consider myself so fortunate because I left in 2007, and that was at the cusp of the evangelical movement, the coinage of the phrase religious
Yes.
trauma, like
Yep.
the vocabulary that I needed as a writer. I needed language in order to interpret what had happened to me. And it started right away. My first meeting with my attorney, he handed me a book called The Battered Woman.
Yep.
And I was like, I don't need this. I wasn't battered. And he's like, yes, you were. You'll see yourself on the pages. And I was like, to me, battered meant punched in the face. And I had never been punched in the face. I had
Yep.
everything
It's
else
not
done to
unless you're
me.
punched in the face, you go to the hospital or you die.
Right. Oh, and you have to call the police. Like
Yep.
I had never even filed a police report. So learning to take each situation and use the proper name for it,
Yeah.
call it marital rape, call it manipulation, call it narcissism, call it codependency, people pleasing, neediness, like that is what ultimately helped me understand and put these things into context. And then when I started writing it as a book, it was a therapeutic journal at first, and then it
Yeah.
became a novel, and then it became my memoir. I had to take each scene and create a sequence and a setting, and then I could pull the lens back and see, okay, what's happening in the movement? What were my influencers?
Yeah.
Who were the characters? What else was happening? Were these even fair asks of me? I was a child. I was a young woman. I was not given full information. I didn't have any agency. So then that context then helps you divest from shame because you
Yep.
realize none of this was fair to you. And you didn't do it all by yourself. And actually, I'm not powerful enough to be the villain of everything. I can't
Yep.
be the reason everything went wrong because I'm literally not a supervillain.
Yeah.
And
And it's
I'm
like
just a
I'm not
person.
powerful enough to absolutely control every detail of a situation. Like that's not possible.
Right.
Yeah. But it's this idea and it ties back to purity culture in the sense that yes, you're, in the church, it's your purpose is to be a good wife and a mother. And then they tack on this thing where all sexual sin or all problems in relationship are the fault of the woman.
Yes.
Because if he does something, well, it's because you didn't submit enough. If he cheats, well,
Hmm.
it's because you let yourself go.
Right.
And it's just so unbelievably harmful. So did you ever have a kind of a eureka moment where you were like, wow, I don't feel that shame anymore, or I don't feel shame around this certain thing? Or was it kind of just a slow and gradual change?
Both and there were moments where it was slow and gradual, depending on the category. And then the real piece, the real epiphany came. My second husband was not an abuser the way my first husband was an abuser, but he was a high control patriarch. And that's normal. You know, when you leave a cult like environment or a high control environment, we repeat cycles because of who we are and
Yeah.
what we attract. And that happened. So he did not want to be married to a writer. And so when I sold the book, he's like, stop writing or stay married. And so I chose writing and I chose me. And when I chose me, and then I stepped out of that like calmly and just rationally and went about my business and went about what I'm here for and stayed invested in my work. And then took this epic European trip on my
Ugh.
terms,
Yep.
slowly, quietly. That's when I felt like I'm whole. I'm not just like a repaired person or always going to be broken or something's like eternally wrong with me. Like there's a lot of that stigma when you come out of abuse that I'll just always be broken, always be a wounded bird. No, I don't have any time for that. I'm a whole person. I've put myself back together. I've reclaimed who Tia is. It took me a while to get there because I was denied, child development. I had to still develop as a person, but I
Yep.
have done that. I am an actualized human. So at 50, that feels great to be able to say.
I love that. That's that like I can see in your face when you talk about it. It
Hmm.
just gets brighter and brighter and brighter
Yeah,
and
because
brighter.
it's my light.
It's incredible. So what's your kind of perspective again being through what you've been through? What's your
Mhm.
perspective on Christianity in America today? Like what do you see? How do we change the harm it's doing?
Yeah, so this is my work now because when I wrote the story, the book, I thought I was just writing a book. I often call it the real life prequel to The Handmaid's Tale,
Yeah.
and I knew that it would be culturally interesting. I didn't
Yeah.
expect it to be so culturally relevant. I feel like everything that I ran from and escaped from is here for my country,
Yeah.
which gave me a unique insider's view and an ability to translate what's happening. It's to talk about this over and over again and to be able to retell the story without re-traumatizing myself is a reflection of the trauma healing work that I've done.
Yeah.
But also to be able to like look at a headline and say, I can translate for that for you. I know where that came from and what this is from. And, that's what really gave me my footing and my active advocacy work now, because I do have all this material and background and it wasn't for
Hmm.
nothing. Like I can use this, I can help somebody with it. I can make something beautiful with all the crap they gave me.
Yep.
So that's kind of where I take it. We are living in the Christian vision that started in the 80s and 90s.
Yep.
Project 2025 and the Heritage Foundation all began at that same time in my character arc, and here we are. They have worked tirelessly and quietly for this outcome, and we're here. And now America's really at a decision point. Like
Yeah.
it's up to us to decide if this is what we want to do.
We're at a crossroads and it's pretty severe.
Yeah, and we've lived this way before. Like that's the rub for me. Is like,
Yeah.
wait a second, they're not suggesting rocket science or a new way of being or an evolution. They are considering going backwards to what we already know. We already have outcomes from that. We
Yep.
have
We already know it doesn't
testimonies.
work.
Exactly. There's a reason why we evolved from it in the first place. And they want to go back. And so it's up to people who've lived that and said, no, actually, that's not going to result in what they promise. Their promises are bunk. And I can
Yep.
tell you why. I think that's the only hope we have.
And that's actually been my thought. So I've more recently become a bigger talking head in this space. And
Yes, I love your content.
thank you. It's actually been really refreshing to feel like everything kind of makes sense because I wrestled a long time with like, why did I have to grow up in this environment and all the
Hmm.
abuse, like physical, emotional, psychological, religious, and go through all these things. I went to Liberty. Like it was like my entire existence till I was 25. And
Yeah.
now I realize I'm like, oh, because of my dad's insistence on my knowledge of American history and the
Yes.
Bible and
Yes.
fundamentalism and growing up
You
with
know.
Republican politicians, I can call you on your shit
Hmm.
because I know what you're doing and I know what you're manipulating. I know who you got it from. I know all the talking points.
Yep.
And I think, what do you think? Because we know that the evangelical movement is so good at networking
Yeah.
and they are so good at manipulating young people.
Yeah.
How does both the progressive community, like the general left and the
Hmm.
ex-evangelicals, how do we step in and intercede for young people? Because that's really who the
Yeah.
target is. And if they can latch on and pollute the 18 to 23-year-olds, because they can pull women in too. They promise women
Hmm.
this romantic, easy, beautiful life. And it is not that. It is
Right.
not that. They are setting you up for abuse and elder poverty and
Hmm.
losing your identity because your identity doesn't matter to them. How do
Right.
we, and even with men, they've made men this reductive
Hmm.
machine, and young men are getting left behind. They're
Yeah.
critically lonely. They're suffering. They're in pain. How do we break that chain? How do we intercede there?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because it's very important that to emphasize that everyone suffers in patriarchy. There's no
Yes.
like the men seem like they come out ahead, and there are some women who will carry water for it, and they seem like they're benefiting from it, but not really, not in the long run. I think the thing that we have to do is keep telling the true stories.
Yep.
The thing that was missing in my experience was that I had no counter evidence. And one of the powers we have that we do really well online and with our own networking is we can blast the stories. We can get the network out. We can respectfully understand where they're coming from and stop vilifying them as like ignorant or naive. They're none of those things. They're
Yep.
the same thing we were. Young people who want to do the right thing, and we're not trying to break our lives. We want to
Yep.
do the prosperous thing. We want to have a good outcome. And unless they have a counter evidence, they don't have a true choice to make.
Yeah.
So offering them that choice and saying, actually, here's some outcome. This is how that worked out for me. You're still free to decide for yourself, but are you sure that that's going to get you what you want?
Yep.
People don't like to feel shitty, and I think that when they are in that environment and they feel shitty, if they know there's a better way, they can see evidence of a better way, they'll have an option. And I think that's why the religious right works so hard to shut us down, take our platforms, ban our books, police our voices, because they know that they can't actually risk a counter evidence.
Because some young people and people that are experiencing the negative impact of this, they already intuitively know something's not right.
Mm-hmm.
And so when presented with those stories, it's like, oh, okay, I'm not crazy. I'm not sinful. I'm not being selfish. I agree. And it's like, I really think that with the way that we're going, I truly believe that it's the evangelical voices that are going to step up and say, hey, like, trust me, you don't want that. Like, that's not where you want to be. And I did a little spiritual retreat this weekend. And one of the things that fell in for me was this epidemic of male loneliness. And being a woman and being someone who has definitely made content addressing the behavior and some of the entitlements of men, it really made me realize this weekend that, again, men are hurting.
Yeah.
And they're hurting so much. And we've got this huge, again, traditional trad movement happening where you're just a paycheck and you're not allowed to feel all these emotions. And what I thought about this weekend when that fell in for me was when women are lonely or we're really hurt, we call mom, we call our sisters, we cry ourselves to sleep, we call our girlfriends. We have been allowed to feel those emotions and reach out for community. And I think that men haven't been.
Right.
And so the options typically skew towards violence, addiction, or self-harm.
Right.
And I realized this last weekend that the way that this changes, and I think the way that we reach into young people, is we cannot leave the men behind. Because women have been growing and elevating and evolving because we've finally had the opportunity to do so.
Right.
And I think that's just something I realized that I had left out, that I wasn't stepping in enough and interceding for men enough in this movement, especially young men saying, hey, this isn't good for you either. And you're allowed to be a whole person and you're worth more than your job or how many women you conquer. And like, it's like, you're not a simp because you love somebody. That's crazy. These red pill guys are capitalizing on your pain and leaving you more in pain.
Right.
Or in jail.
Right.
Like,
and that pain's really important because the pain leads to grief, and grief, when it's not expressed, leads to anger. So if that's the only socially acceptable avenue they have is to get really mad about how much they're hurting, we're just going to end up with more anger from these men. If we back it up and say, oh, we know you're hurting. Here's some empathy. Here's some kindness. Yeah. And they're vilifying empathy. Oh, they're working really hard on that right now.
I know. But that was like growing up with, Jesus loves the little children of the world, red and yellow, black and white.
Jesus is too liberal for them.
Right. And then now they're like the toxic sin of empathy. And I'm like, I'm sorry. What Bible are you reading?
The Old Testament,
just the Old
conquer
Testament.
And vanquish.
Yeah,
exactly.
The genocide God. They're like, we like him.
They
He's
like
our
him.
fan. He's our. Yeah. It's absolutely insane. I can't. And before we started today, and I was looking at the stack of your books, you were talking about the novel that you're working on now, revolving around bitterness, which I think ties into this anger and this emotion and how bitterness can be a catalyst for change. Can you tell us about the book, but also your thoughts on bitterness, how it relates to change?
So I should just insert here for a second. My second book is coming out next May. It's called The Soul of Healing, and it's a survivor's guide to recovery from religious trauma.
Oh,
and
that's wonderful.
It's like a layperson's guide of everything I encountered in my trauma healing experience and what I think other people will benefit from. That's like tried and true. Like I tried everything, went everywhere with it, and came out this very different person, which really led me to the whole bitterness vein of there's so much shame in religion against bitterness. They don't want you to feel bitter. They want you to suppress it and push it away and don't let bitterness be. But bitterness is something we feel when there's been injustice happening, and then we are not allowed to address it. We are shutting down our empathy, and we are looking the other way from crime, and we are not changing patterns and addressing abusers and holding people accountable. That's what makes us bitter. And we know in recovery that letting ourselves be bitter and letting that ragey fire inside of us against injustice, let it breathe. That's what fuels the change that we need. So the two books are kind of tied because my soul of healing is a fire inside of me that I have
Yep.
to maintain.
Yep.
And that means I'm looking at injustices and letting myself feel angry about it and feel intolerant of like, no, this cannot stay. This is not what I accept for my life. I will not be a broken person for the rest of my life. I have a saying, trauma took my past. It was not going to get my future and my present too. I'm in charge of that.
Yep.
So I use this fire inside of me to fuel the change. But I want to explore these stories of women who tamp it down and then learn to tap into it. So there's all kinds of ways that bitterness manifests in our life. Sometimes it makes us sick. Sometimes it toxifies our families and our
Mine's been
generations.
injury.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I'm really fascinated. I'm like excited to get to write some fiction. It's always going to be like with an element of true religious horror because that's what I'm comfortable with and I know. And
So your Soul of Healing book, is that May of 25 or May of 26?
May of 26.
May of 26
Yeah.
that comes out. Okay. I just wanted to
Yeah.
clarify that in my brain.
Right. It's still a ways off, but it will have a way of getting here really quickly. So I'm excited about that. But the way publishing works, you have to be working on your new projects right away. So this novel is kind of a modern retelling of the Book of Job from his wife's point of view. I've always had a heart for her because he is
such
so
a good take.
he's so lauded as this like righteous man. And I'm like, he radicalized on her and she lost everything. And he's held up as this like wonderfully patient person, but she was not restored. And in the Jewish tradition, she has the name, she has the rest of her story. She dies out with the cows. It's really sad. In my story, she's going to win. It's also a trad wife commune where the men radicalize and the women resist. So they learn to tap into their bitterness and do something about it.
Just be like, no.
Yeah, exactly. So I get fired up about this. You can tell my pace just changed too. I'm like, I just cannot
I
wait.
do the same. Sometimes somebody will hit a topic where I'm just like, are you joking? Like, well, and I had this conversation the other day with someone about like the fact that Genesis is fiction. And like discussing that.
Pretty poetry.
Yeah,
That's
it's
what
like this is not real. This is not even written in the same time frame. It's thousands of years after it supposedly happened. But then we discussed Job as well, and I'm like, there's so many like issues with Job. But like the one that cracks me up again for people who take it literally, I'm like, okay, so who was recording the conversation between Satan and God?
Yeah.
When Satan just rolls into heaven and is like, hey, we're gonna play a game. We're gonna play a game. This is your most loyal person. Cool. Kill his entire family and see what he does. Like that's great. That's crazy.
Yeah,
and
a maniacal view of God.
It's maniacal and cruel and brutal. And it's so interesting now to look back at it with that lens and just be like, man, I really 100% totally believed that.
Yeah,
I believed that all of this was literal. I believed all of it was true. I believed that doctors were aborting babies as they were being born. Like I believed all of that. And it's such a lie.
But it's a chain of lies, One is dependent upon the other. If you ever go back and read the part of Job where God and Job are talking, like he kind of has had it at this point. He's lost everything, his wife, his health, everything. And he's at the point he's talked to all his friends and his friends are like, okay, here are the takes. He gets in this conversation with God and it's a gaslit mess, the whole thing. How dare you question me?
Yep.
And that's what we carried, and once you have that in your heart of how dare you question me, you're primed to obey and believe everything.
And it's like, you're so predisposed to believe magical thinking that when someone puts war chats in a text thread,
oh my God, we can't make it up.
And then they say, no, I didn't. You're like, no, they didn't. It's not a big deal. It's not a war chat. Excuse me. It's got time signatures with the weapons and the bombing times and locations. What would you call that? And when someone gets shot at and their ear is magically healed the next week. Really? That's fascinating. There's no mark at all. Interesting. But
we're still talking about Kennedy, but we can't know anything about that shooting.
And the guy the guy that did it just disappeared and we don't know anything about him or where he is or what happened. It's just like, interesting.
It's that ability to question that's been shut down. And the veil is so thick. I mean, there's really no like breaking it from the outside. That is an internal change.
It is because you've been programmed from a young age that they tell you, anyone who questions this is trying to lead you away from God. Yeah. And thanks to, especially during Reagan's administration, the evangelicals marrying into politics, becoming essentially a political party is really what it is. It's not even a religion anymore. It's a political party.
No.
it's become really messy.
Yeah, very, very
And
convoluted. And deconstruction means you're going to hit every layer.
yes, and it's going to be brutal. There's going to be some rough moments in there. There will be.
Yeah.
But what do you see? Like, what is your feeling for the future? Like, just kind of intuitively,
Yeah.
what do you feel? What do you see?
I really believe we still have a lot of chance, a lot of hope. I believe that we have had a little bit of Pandora's box. You can't put it all back. You can't just like liberate generations of women and then tell them they have to go back to corsets and silence. I don't think that's necessarily going to work. Um,
Yeah.
I really do prefer a progressive, evolutionary, expansive view of both the universe and God and humanity.
Same.
I like utopian and protopian futures, not dystopian. I really like the idea of advancement and understanding things. I'm not scared of new technology. I'm curious about it, and I try to retain that sense of curiosity and wonder because it's inherently anti-fundamentalist. If you're curious and can ask questions, and you're wondering, and you don't always have to have the right answer for everything, you're in a like inoculized place against rigid thought and form. So it's a healthy place for me to be, and I try to be that in my interactions with people, and hopefully it's contagious. I like curious, smart people who are doing curious, smart things. And I believe in that contagion and critical mass, like can still win. And traveling helped because I got to see what, like, for example, what Europeans think of America, which was much different than hearing about what Europeans think of America.
Yeah.
Go actually have a conversation with them and broaden your worldview. It was huge. And really, if you're inside of that and you're thinking, I can't do that because I'll get in trouble with God or whatever, then question, why do you have such a limited view of God? God can't think of another way to get you or take care of you in that setting? Or, like, did he have to drown everybody in Noah's Ark, or is an all-powerful God capable of a new solution?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, staying in that curious place
And
is
what I
healthy.
tell people, especially with people who are wrestling with, they don't feel comfortable walking away from the idea of God. Like, I have some friends who have completely deconstructed into atheism, and some that are like, for me, it's like, like God inherently in my mind is this entity that is so big and so different from anything I understand that there's no way I can give, even saying him, right, is limiting.
Right, exactly.
If both masculine and feminine are divine and they operate on a spectrum, who's to say that God even has gender?
Right.
We don't
Wow.
know. And if
I
everything
love
that.
has
purpose, then why wouldn't it matter what time and day and place you were born, and that certain characteristics come up for those kind of, like, I challenge people. I'm like, what if God is all this and more?
Yeah.
And
That's exciting to me. I love
it
that.
makes me so
Yeah.
excited. I'm like, well, it could be this, or what if this?
Yeah.
What's the universe really like? And it's so, and I get excited because I'm like, it makes me so excited. And I just listened to a podcast on like, kind of like the fourth dimension, and but it's,
I know.
it's that curiosity to be like, I think that it's probably far more likely that I don't understand any of this.
Yeah, and isn't that better than
Right?
solving
It's-
for God? I don't want
Exactly,
a
like-
God that can fit in a box in a little
No.
catechism. I
And
want
I don't
wonder.
want one who's so angry that he just like kills entire groups of people when he
Right.
doesn't like them.
Yeah,
Like, that
I
doesn't
created
sound
you,
like
now
a-
I'm going to smote you.
Yeah.
Like, why do that?
Like, that doesn't
that's not
sound
what
like
I
a
want.
good, loving God to me. That doesn't
No.
seem correct. And so I just challenge people, like, what if he's bigger than that?
Yeah.
He or she or they, or what if he
I
doesn't have
love
gender?
like dark matter, learning about dark matter and expansive universe and sci-fi and physics and all of the
Yeah.
things. It's like just fascinating. Fractals. If you've ever seen a time lapse of the planet from space, it looks like the Earth is breathing.
Yeah.
That just is thrilling. Or like the idea of the divine in our collective.
Yep.
Because it is like if you've ever been like in a big crowd with that collective effervescence, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I can feel this being a divine spirit. This feels like something, and that's repeated in nature because of cells and individuals, and then on
Yep.
down. So,
Well, and
yeah,
I'm
that's
a metal
thrilling.
vocalist, so I've definitely had moments with the band, and you have moments in these shows where something very spiritual is happening,
Yeah.
and the room shifts, and the sound changes, and the colors change, and there is no other explanation than there is some kind of divine, otherworldly experience happening with all of these people collectively right now.
Right.
That, like,
Right.
I'm not manufacturing; it's just here.
Yep.
And
It's just
I've been
here.
on both ends of that as the performer and as the recipient of it.
Yeah, and it's
that's-
also biblical because
Yeah.
where two or more are gathered, there am I also. So, like,
Yep.
It's that they're not in conflict with one another.
Yep.
And I
And I
think
think
that's
that
really, yeah.
the Bible has given us these little nuggets of truth that we've kind of like skipped over because
Hmm.
we built this house that God lives in, and these are the qualities that we've prescribed to it, and we've decided that
Hmm.
that's it when
Right.
it may not even be the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
And my last question for today,
Yeah.
as you know, people are listening to this, but especially women who are in a traditional space that's maybe not working for them or is
Hmm.
maybe abusive or feels wrong, feels stifling, what would you say to encourage those women who are starting to ask those questions?
Yeah, don't feel like it has to be all or nothing. That is the like probably biggest thing is that they're scared if they make one step, they're making all the steps, and nothing in life is that way. I Your intuition is very damaged when you're in these environments. So learning to trust yourself again is going to be baby steps and tiny steps and doing little things that feel good on a daily basis, looking for little joys, little happiness, allowing small questions, making a friend with somebody a little different than you. Like you can let yourself acclimate to change slowly. You can give yourself permission to metabolize your new information on your own time frame. Something I say, resist a life of urgency. And that goes
Yeah.
for change and healing too. Like we do not heal overnight. Our scars don't just go away one day. It's very slowly those stitches happen. So it's the same thing. And if you're having doubts, you're right. If you weren't having doubts, everything would be fine. So I would trust those doubts completely. And you are in charge of your pace. Nobody should rush you. Nobody should manufacture or prescribe changes for you. Those are actually red flags of another high control source. So trust yourself. And I think way leads to way. So one little step will lead to another one,
Yeah.
and
Agree.
then and so on.
And of course, everyone who's listening to this, I cannot recommend Tia Leving's book, The Well Trained Wife, enough. I read it in one sitting, sitting on the couch, crying and wanting to hug her and wanting to call her, and immediately messaged her. And thank you so much for being part of the show today. It means so much. And I'm so thankful for voices like yours because it is voices like yours that freed me
Hmm.
because those voices were starting to come out and get loud. And I have a lot of hope that we are still going to turn the ship in a positive direction, that it's going to get a little spicy here for a second, but that
Yeah.
ultimately we're all going to grow together, is
You know
what my
why?
belief is.
Unsustainable situations don't sustain. And right now we are holding a very unsustainable situation. So something's going to pop
Yep.
and we're okay. We're strong. We can handle this.
And where online and on social media can everybody find you?
Yeah. So I'm at Tia Levings Writer on all the platforms. My Substack is tialevings.substack.com, where I deconstruct fundamentalism on the daily, like what's going on in our lives. My book is available anywhere books are sold.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for being here.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
I hope you all enjoyed today. I hope you're a little bit inspired in today's current environment, that this is not the end. I truly believe it's the new beginning, that there's a beginning of healing and change that's on the way, but it is really important that we understand the systems that have been built up around us that have reached this critical mass. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of this community. As always, Patreon users get early episodes as well as bonus releases, so sign up in the show notes. Sign up for my email list in case Meta ever vanishes. It's the way to stay in touch. Hopefully, I'll be traveling to you soon, coming this summer with some special shows. And thank you for joining me on Flipping Tables.